Good morning. We start with Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga. From the heart of the savior of 100 deities of Tushita, on a peak of cloud resembling a clam of extremely white fresh curd, King of Dhamma, omniscient Losandrapa, please come here together with your sons. In the sky before me, on a lion throne, lotus and moon, my perfect pure Guru smiles with delight. Supreme field of merit for my mind of faith, please abide for 100 yawns to spread the teachings. Your holy mind has the intelligence that understands the full extent of objects to be known. Your holy speech with its excellent explanations is an ear ornament for those of good fortune. Your holy body is radiantly beautiful with glory renowned. To you who are meaningful to see, hear, and remember, I prostrate. Pleasing drinking water, various flowers, fragrant incenses, lice, scented waters, and so forth. Oceans of cloud-like offerings, both actually arranged and mentally emanated. I offer to you the supreme field of merit. Whatever non-virtue of body, speech, and mind, especially those opposite to the three vows that I have collected from beginningless time, I confess each and every one with fervent regret from my heart. You strove for much learning and practice in this degenerate age, and made your freedoms and richnesses meaningful by abandoning the eight worldly concerns. Savior, we sincerely rejoice in your extensive deeds. Perfect, pure, holy gurus, from the billowing clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of Dharmakaya, please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dharma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued, exactly as they need. May whatever virtue I have collected benefit the teachings and all transmigratory beings, and in particular may it cause the essence of perfect pure Losandrapa's teachings to shine forever. Sajipaki Chushi Metok Tramri Rablishi Nidegembadi Sange Jindu Mite Ua Idro Kunanda Shinla Chupasho. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lama Tsongkhapa and his two sons, may I, my family members, and all sentient beings be able to meet, practice, and actualize the teachings of the victorious one, Losandrapa, who had the morality of eminently pure way of life, was courageous in the extensive conduct of the sons of the victorious ones, and accomplished the yoga of two stages of supreme bliss and emptiness. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalaka Niryatayami. By the force of having fervently requested in this way, hollow beams of white light are emitted from the hearts of the perfect pure Father and Sons, and combining into one enter my crown. White nectar, the color of milk, flows from the opening of tube of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirit harms, negative karmas, obscurations, and their imprints without exception. My body becomes as pure and clear as crystal. We recite 5 line Miktsema 3 times. Migme tsewe tenchen chen rezi, drime gempe wampo jampel yang, dupo malu jonze sawenda, kanchen gepe tsungen tsong kapa, losandra pe shabla sowade. Migme tsewe tenchen chen rezi, drime gempe wampo jampel yang, dupo malu jonze sawenda, Kanchen kepe tsungen tsongkapa, losandra pe shabla sowade. Mikme tsewe tenchen chen rezi, drime gempe wampo jampelyang, dupo malu jonze sawenda, kanchen kepe tsungen tsongkapa, losandra pe shabla sowade. And a prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings. Through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in the glory for fortunate disciples.
Sangye Chedang Tsogin Chonam La Chancho Pardu Dani Kyapsunchi Dagi Chushi Gyebang Dagi Rolan Penshi Sangye Drupara Sho Sangye Chedang Tsogin Chonam La Chancho Pardu Dani Kyapsunchi Dagi Chushi Gyebang Dagi Rolan Penshi Sangye Drupara Sho Sangye Chedang Tsogin Chonam La Chancho Pardu Dani Kyapsun Dagi Chushi Gyebang Dagi Rolan Penshi Sangye Drupara Sho Gangi Tuzi Nizone Tawa Tamche Bambi Chere Tambi Chun Tenze Kwadam Tela Chanze Lo Namo Laye Ketan Lodana Jingi Trivon Dana Mi Ketan Dandra Kunji Dranum Chizam Tamje Gedu Dagi Chuden Do. Good morning, everyone. Kopodele. Kusutebo.
Depoyen tuche. Kerangyan depoyena? Topoyena? Namyena.
Namjiro, Namju Gundenge, Nansan Cinderella, Pudan Pomunichina, Pomotus Mangayo, Mayungu Resra, Teri Pumando, Teri Pumandesra.
I noticed today, well, firstly, good morning. I noticed today that unusually there are more women, there are more men here than women, because usually for the Dharma teachings, there's a dominance or an abundance of women and less men. But today, the opposite is the case.
But this man young going to those, but this Condotsa, Garitawa. One's in the Puddles of Chema Shugongi those.
And perhaps that there are more is a good thing, in that possibly men have more of a thing with anger, and
and
therefore they have a greater need for the Dharma teachings.
여러분이 가드나 아니 부모도서 내가 믹스기 잠지체도 송도스 디 여러분이 다 같이 송 말하더라. 원이지 배나 빠와다 아마니 채와나 부들이야 아마 참아도
His Holiness often says that women have have a particular affinity with, or a particular affinity with compassion, and we can see this with a newborn child. The particular care, compassionate care that a mother gives to her newborn child.
여러분이 룸직 송거다 룸선은 아니 로르기나 콩 갑직라야 더 롱바 셴바질라야 남드나 페비 갑둘라 아니 틱델야 사상진도스 남드나라라 캬하고라다디
네.
아니 생각 아마디 베 부디를 따니 야마케 공바자 부디니 코 바와디니 쿠데선스 따라체 마선스
His Holiness also recounts a story of when he was traveling long distance by aeroplane, and there was a young child traveling with their parents, and it was a long flight overnight, and the father slept so well, but the mother all night up and down the aisle holding her child. I don't know the word, but how mums shake their child or juggle their child to help pacify it. So she didn't get a wink of sleep, but the father, he had a lovely restful evening.
대단한서 장부 싸운다고 그래서 아니 티치디게 찍지나 근데 심진도 진와나 나르게 사슈디 근데 당한주 별롱발이야 이약단 드세죠다 이약 이약로 아니 포도서 하장 나르게 싸워 갸그리 싸워 모두스 딘디 갸그리 싸워요 말했어 근데 심진 나인 바이나 다가를 레던도서 티지디게 나른수 포도속에 산지기 최 만지 쉬와이나 아니 야구였어레스
Sometimes in animals you can see a clear distinction between the general behavior of the male of the species and the female of the species. So in Tibet, where I'm from, the yaks are widely known. So we have these big animals called yaks. So the yak is the male and the female is the dri. And yaks, they're full of pride, arrogant. Whereas the dri, the female of the species, she doesn't have this at all. So maybe if we can extrapolate this to humans, then I think for men, there's a greater need for you to hear Buddha's teachings.
근데 나 간지 또 산지 좀 된 뒤에 지단 최망부 송여라더라 최망부 송여 더 디나니 아니 다 최초도 그 최디 카레스 라운디 셰르브님 보세티 셰르브님 보다 아니 하장 그 개체위 최디 셰르브님 보드리스 셰르브님 보드리스
The Buddha Shakyamuni, in his lifetime, he gave a vast number of teachings, but amongst them, probably the supreme is the Perfection of Wisdom teaching, the Heart Sutra. This is a very short, concise teaching with but wherein the meaning is especially profound.
셰르님은 갱다 갱거라 식디 많이 nenga요 말아 숙동바오 동반이 숙리신 동반이 리신 더 수요 말에서지 디송어스 디 독독레스 더 셰르님부 도 지바나 더 디간은 차고레스 sometimes
The Churke Tsidrup Sheriff Nimpuki Tsidrup Day Yankya Songaknang?
Suk tombo, tombani susu, sulishin tombani lishin su yomare sejara.
Also, so, very famous lines from the Heart Sutra. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is not other than emptiness. Lapi.
Reda di karchin kechishu chagores laundi. The karchin kechishu chagores laundi. And do korang tsenlaya, sherab nimbos, be sherab gipigitachi, manzo suburoena, subu nang kechishu di the ning chagorasra, ning. ning lega machena, and the subu sama lega machia chagdora. O dinanshingi, and sherab nimboti. Sherab nimbodi, and that tombani tobi, sherab di chagores. These are tombani said the Kandachis laundi, Tanjigita, and a Sula journey, and sonde tea. That tea tombani ninsulta, chimachinjandot. The United Gunsen Mambo ton sometime your day, Tantangumati, tombani di, the digiton, the tombani some go series.
Tinekunda Kirantanta the Ning Nangshin, Tompani, Yaman Tompani Tokpe setup.
Sherab
Setup, Tinekos.
Yeah.
This particular teaching by the Buddha is called the Heart Sutra. The sutra shows that it's a teaching from the Buddha himself. So why is it called the Heart Sutra? Is because in the same way that our heart is the, you could say, the most important part of our body, in that if there's a problem with the heart, we really have a serious problem. If the heart is not beating, we really have a serious problem. So similarly, this Heart Sutra is about the perfection of wisdom. And this is because the wisdom that understands reality, or the wisdom, to express it differently, the wisdom that realizes emptiness, this is the very heart of the Buddha's teachings. So this is, of course, that's just the statements I'm making, but there are many reasons that practitioners need to establish the validity of what I'm saying. But just in brief to say, the very heart of the Buddha's teachings is the wisdom that understands reality. That's all.
The things that the countries kitchen which is long the chew on the shell on the rock. The Tombani Dovi sheriff the countries kitchen which is long the any the part of it, the chew then goyak Junzendi, Nanzu Devan Devatan, Dungaman Deva. The any Tanganzu Tamigi, Sam come Chigbainza, and the Deva drew Goyatan, Dungar Se Goyat. The Maranzo Ranshin Samagi, Tandazo, the teacher wanza, Deva Druya the Dungar Sayagi, Tap Yashudita, Tap Lanamevadi, Sheriff the Chagores,
Why is the wisdom that realizes emptiness, or to express it differently, the wisdom that realizes reality as it is, why is this seen as fundamentally important in Buddhism, the very heart of Buddhism? Well, a foundational understanding of Buddhism is that each and every one of us, we only want to be happy. And corresponding to this, none of us want to suffer or experience problems or difficulty. All we want is to abide in lasting, stable happiness. And this is the same for myself, for yourselves, for every single living being, human and non-human. It's the same for all of us. And there, with this recognition, we can also understand that all of us want to know the very best method to achieve happiness and to gain freedom from suffering, or to never experience problems or difficulties again. If there are a variety of methods and we are asked which do you want to know well, we'd all choose the very best one. And the very best of the methods to achieve happiness and to never have to experience problems or difficulties is to cultivate the wisdom realizing reality. That's all.
Tadire, Dinza, Deva Yongyalaya, Dungar Segugros, Dungar Servalaya, Dungar Kalaten, Junguyore, and Dig Savadi Selmatuna, Dunga said, yeah, Sel Tuguyomares. Dunga Kalden in Jung Savadi Munzin Chiondi, Chidang Mus Pigetaji, Chagdang Tony, Ra, Ganzo, and in Dachaki Wangi. Then Tamanti was there, Shadangi Wangi Tamanti were on there, Chagdog Wangi Tamanti were Gansu Dungar Musun Jangi, Chagdang Monsum Didi, the one Chagores, the Gansu Sosu sort took Matu, Damanda younger Madon, only big by Shimju Chini, Taji Chingijimbana, Dungar Musun Jangi, Chagdang di Chagores, Chagdang Monsum the Chagores. That Chagdang Dayag Penan Dechan the Condition Dangores Landi. Decha di zu decha dang shedang di zu di rang jeban zimi jinzin se tigi ani decha dang shedang gi yores ro rang jinzin lo shuk chembu leon di ani rangin debadan tumbaji lena lamsan chagba gi yaje dang rangin debadan mintumbaji lena lamsan shedang gi yaje ro jinzin gang di yungores.
With this recognition that we all want to abide in lasting happiness, a happiness that is never punctuated by even a moment of suffering or the slightest pain, difficulty, or problem, we then want to seek out the methods to gain freedom from problems so that we can abide in lasting, stable happiness. So that then we need to think now at a deeper level. So if I want to gain freedom from suffering, and so this term suffering applies to every unwanted experience. So it's to be understood very broadly, from mild discontent up to extreme heartache. So if we want to be freed of all forms of suffering, one has to know the causes that lead to suffering, the causes from which suffering arises. If one does not know the causes from which suffering arises, it will be impossible to bring an end to suffering. If one comes to identify, to recognize clearly what the causes are that lead to suffering, then those we can strive to eradicate and thereby gain freedom from suffering. So what are those causes? So they are a collection of consciousnesses or of minds that afflict us, that disturb us. So these are minds such as attachment, ignorance, anger, pride, jealousy, resentment. It's a large group of these that through their arisal, we experience suffering. And the stronger they are, the more we suffer. But these, we can look, there are a large number of these afflictions, these minds which afflict us, cause us to suffer. They can be brought down to two: attachment and anger. So attachment or desire, this is what we're drawn to, what we want. The anger is what we repelled from, what we dislike. So both of these words we need to understand like with suffering, in a very broad manner. So anger doesn't refer just to full-blown rage, but it goes from hatred and full-blown rage all the way down to annoyance and frustration. And likewise with attachment, there's a strong gradient. And from these, other afflictions arise, such as jealousy and so forth. But from these two core afflictions, attachments and anger, they themselves have a singular root as well. They themselves have a single affliction from which they arrive. And this is the self-cherishing mind, or a mind that grasps at oneself as dear. And the stronger in any given moment one grasps at oneself as dear, the stronger the resulting attachment and anger. Because holding oneself as dear, holding ourselves, our own wishes, first and foremost, we'll want to draw things towards us that we desire. This is attachment. And the stronger this grasping at oneself as dear is, the self-cherishing mind, the stronger it is, the stronger we will want things to come to us, the stronger our attachment. Similarly with anger, the stronger our self-cherishing is, the stronger we'll want to repel things against us, repel things away from us. And therefore, the stronger our anger will be. So therefore, our suffering is caused by a variety of afflictions which come from attachment and anger. They are the primary afflictions, which they themselves come from ignorance. In particular, the ignorance that grasps at oneself as dear. That's what can.
Terda dinzang chagdang di rang jinzing ro rang jeban jimbi jinzing gi wangita chagdang legi yabanza ani ta dunghar tsawa di chagdang chi chagdang gi tsawa di rang jinzing yongya di rang jinzing yongya di ani dangzin se tel tugoris kanji dangzin dang rang jinzing nimbo di ani karso taji samzalaya pong diksegra nyamdu leondi teni ani chagdang kechigo res ro dangzi shukchenbu wangi ranjinzintiki ranjinzi shukchewi wangi ani susun debandu tumba tela ndachaki wata mentumba tela ani shedang kiyati di ani ro nyumung chokun rodang di dungar gi chokun rodang di dindijire yores tarwa.
This sequence of understanding some laying out is firstly, there's the recognition. We all want to be happy. And to be happy, we need to be freed from all problems, difficulties, and suffering. And to be freed from suffering, we need to recognize how it comes about. Independence on what does it arise? So when we know what the causes are of suffering, that's what we can focus on eradicating. So the suffering we want to be freed from, this comes from our variety of minds that afflict us, or consciousnesses that afflict us. So, and these can be then broken down to two primary ones of attachment and anger. Then attachment and anger themselves come from grasping at oneself as dear. And the stronger one grasps at oneself as dear in any given moment, the stronger the resulting attachment and anger will be, and the stronger the resulting suffering will be. But in addition to this root cause of grasping at oneself as dear, there is another affliction, that is the ignorance of self-grasping. So these two really are, in English we'd say something like two sides of the same coin. So we would say there's a single root to all our suffering, and we can express it as the ignorance of self-grasping and or the grasping at oneself as dear. So there really are two sides of the same coin. And so whichever one we are focusing on in our conversation or in our meditation, the stronger that is, grasping at oneself as dear, or self-grasping, the ignorance of self-grasping, the stronger that is, the stronger the resulting attachment and anger, the stronger the suffering. Or the weaker, our ignorance of self-grasping or our grasping at ourself as dear, the weaker that is, the weaker the resulting attachment and anger will be, and therefore the weaker the suffering. So this is the process, I hope it's a little clear, that leads to our suffering. Our suffering is a result from the arisal of these afflicted minds, these minds that afflict us so. And these also arise in a particular sequence with having a root cause. That's all.
Pena lomba ni mang tu gya yo ba na mang ma tu pugil zing go rasra mang ma tu so don tu ne zin ta dunga nyong deng zawi ge pug di ani pigi gyakap ti ge ta pombu di dangz mari wa ro di pombu de cha ga do asra an di nyam de mag ben dun ro che kuni ge ge je she mang ma tang che mang ma tu zing ju go ra ta ro di nang shen ro je ngaran so ngaransun bena taji dosto ondige kapkale ngaransun chik chammancham yongya de di phuk di songen di dangz mari badang rangjinzi ni bot chagores 더 디가 응아르자가 축축 되고 알았어. 아 디인장 다 당즈 말이 바디 간다지거리스라운디. 그게 야컵디 뽕보담 다 간다지거리스라운디. 아니 그게 다 라니기 닐울라야 베 수수 내당 뭐마지거라스 수수 내당 뭐마지거라. 대다 베디 신줄로드 진딩인게 아니 상물로디 야 당즈 세거레스. 라
When two nations go to war, they're either their military leader or usually their president will make that decision. My army is going to go to war with that country's army. And in dependence on that decision made by presumably the president of each country, the soldiers go to battle and they suffer. Warfare is suffering. And they are suffering because they were directed into battle by their president. So you take this global picture and bring it down to ourselves. Our suffering, like soldiers suffer in battle, our suffering comes from our afflictions, which have as their root our president that abides within. Is this ignorance of self-grasping, or to express it in the other way, grasping at oneself as dear. It's this root consciousness, this root afflicted consciousness that sends us into battle, in other words, causes our suffering. And the remarkable thing with this is the self-grasping consciousness. It grasps at the self as existing in a particular way, but the self does not exist in this way. It's therefore a completely deluded consciousness, because it believes that the self exists like this, but therefore grasps at it as existing in this way, holds it as the self as existing in this way, when it does not. So therefore, we call it an ignorance, because it is not in accordance with reality. It's not a wisdom. It's an ignorance that grasps at the self, believes that the self exists in a way that it doesn't. And this mind is completely mistaken. It's completely mistaken. Hence, it's called an ignorance. And this also applies to not just ignorance of self-grasping, but also to grasping at oneself as dear. That's all.
ngadi rawang chuba ro ngadi pige su khangla ya madeba su khangla ya madeba yudin pe rawang de chuba su khangla ya demek rawang de chuba zingwar ngadi ro anzuta ngade che se jora ngade che se nga ani nga dewudu nga jibudu nga jibumundu nga nagidu se nga joras ngadi be ani su khangla ya madeba 아니 유딘이 라운드 초반진 심바델이야 당전 세그레스 당전 세그레스 다 디섬다운디 나디 틴디지 요레베스 라바이나 나디 피기 당진긴 심바난신기 나디 라운드 초바지 유딘이 피기 담페는 아주 체가 들어바이나 아니 지 니에 요교지 피기 유딘이 요레베스 라바이나 요 말이스 메타저레스 이메나 디 나주게 샘나노라야 딘지기 여번 짐바치 몽바치 융구요레스 융구요레스 데르다요
To understand then why the self-grasping is an ignorance, because it grasps at the self as existing in a way that it doesn't. This takes quite some reflection. So let's introduce this. Everything we think about, every object of our consciousness. So this can be something we are hearing and therefore thinking about, or seeing and therefore thinking about, or a memory, something that we are thinking about from the past, or something from the future, whatever. Everything that our mind is engaging with, so every object of consciousness, it appears to us to exist as it appears to us as if it were independent. It were, and I'll use a number of synonyms to try and get this across. It appears to us as independent. It appears to us as being self-existent. In other words, it exists from its own side, or it exists by way of its own essence, nature, or defining characteristics. So this is how everything appears to us, as if it were independent of anything else. It exists from its own side. So let's take an illustration. If I were to ask you, how are you? Then you reply, I am happy, or I feel a bit ill today, or I'm a little tired, whatever the answer may be. Then we ask, this I that you're referring to, the I that is happy, the I that is a little tired, that I, how does it appear to you? And then secondly, when you recognize how it appears, does it exist in that way or not? Because our self-grasping grasp at the I as existing in the way that it appears, which is, as I just mentioned, independent, self-existent, existing from its own side. Then we ask ourselves, so does it exist in this way or not? And we go through in meditation through a process of investigation or analysis, and we come to find that no such self or no such I exists. No such I or self exists. Then we realize that this consciousness that grasps at the self, that holds the self to exist in the way that it appears, this consciousness is deluded. It's an ignorance. It is completely mistaken. It is not in accordance with reality, because the self does not exist in the way that it appears to us, which is also how we grasp at it, hold at it as existing. That's all.
Terda nga tole sound down there nga round the meba nga pig you didn't need meba titolea sound down the and government this song does be nganzol din swad legmada government chi carson the low ship chu ngabchu masam sinju konla ya ani government chi nga di ni round the meba you didn't meba 셀 니기 메베 돌아 상마지 단디게 아니 지 샘 나올라야 베 먼저 록큐가 나신지
Lokuasena?
록 남칸이 아니
레레레 고성.
록 이거다
고성.
나신게 샘 나올라야 사식 지 재성 통마들에 딘디 재성 성거다 디레다 간지 디카르스나 남기 나 슬라브디기 쇼지 피길이야 딱bat temboda chi ne rawanda chi yoba dodo yoba anzu sorwa daran toni shan rode goras ina teng ngoma de ngad tsega jondi pigile yomaras di meba di gan yo sorwa jile maina lamsang pegi sorwa di jewi yawandi ro ane namshi nanshingi namshin gywa te timba tiwondi lok kyugora di nanshin chi semnala yo sorwa jile gosares
네, 되는 개령 성경에 살펴보거나 겸거는 것에 나가서 덴퍼마 drupa mepa 톡두 디 로 낭신에 그리 로 낭신세나 홉데 칼라
콩라 딘디 총송스 지코라나 딘디 소아지 총송스
나서 덴퍼마 drupa yins 홉데 칼라 통송 디던 드라보
다 겨우는 지금
덴퍼마 drupa yin
제버치로 제버치 다지 피길라야 원에 문도 삼비고 초와질레 도마데 이 감돌라야 샘나 딜레송스
네 데니코소 and 대강나 디로 십중 압중을라래
제
His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he recounts his story about 40-50 years ago. He was engaging in this analysis, looking at how his eye or his sense of self appears, and then investigating to see if it exists in the way that it appears or not. Does it exist as being independent, not influenced by anything else at all, or not? Suddenly he came to recognize, like a flash of lightning. This is not how the self exists. The self is not independent. It doesn't exist by way of its own nature. And he likened it to this flash of lightning clearing the darkness of ignorance in his mind, recognizing that the self does not exist in the way that it appears. That's all.
There's the raw. The ngad Sesagi, ngad selnita, nie mundu sesagita, Jishasaji gogras. The carriers laundi, Nanzu Pumbunga said. Ranganzulia Sugiore, Soroyore, Dushi Yore, and his Sam number Shivaji Yoras. The D Tony, D Nani, winning a near Yona, D Nani ni gogores. D Nani near Mebadi. Any Hakoyondi, Tangad sell Nijumebadi, and it didn't even tango gores.
This process of investigation, then, looking for the self. There needs to be a place that you search. And the only place that one can search and find the I is within our physical and mental aggregates, within our collection of our body and our minds. It's only here within our body and mind that our I can be found. It cannot be anywhere else. So when we engage in this process of analytical investigation, we need to be looking somewhere. So that we'd say there needs to be a basis. And that basis would be our body and mind. If this I is to be found, if the I that appears to us in a particular way is to be found, it must be here, within our body and or mind. That's all.
The Tony and Nijumedi, Pumbung and Carson, Pumbunga Resilaya, Taji Chichin, Pumbunga Resilaya, Tachichin, and Drogo does that D. Sharing Bukalia, Sungores, and the Suk Tomba said, Suk Rangi to be Tomba Sagi, Sukjidoas, Sukjidoa, D. Ranga Sukza Maimba, Penat, on the Mik Tondeagici, and Sada, Doda, Chuda, Shinda, Medola Soba Mahimba, Rangi Pumbujidoas, Susu Sukbujidoas, or did it so quietly, Rangi Subudi, any Rangi to be Tombares. Tomba Jik Tony, and Rangi Tombi Tony, Sukti Shagores. Mado, any Rangi Tomba Le Shembi, Sugiomare, Sug Le Shembi, Rangi to be Tom said, Yomares, Kanji, and this only Dashi Sugdi, Rangi to be Tombati, Tishegores.
The place to search for our self is within our physical mental aggregates. These are 5. There's form, there's feeling, there's which is a consciousness, there's discrimination, or translated as differentiation, or differentiation is good. So form, which is our physical body, feeling, which is a consciousness, differentiation, which is a consciousness, compositional factors, and consciousnesses. So therefore, within these 5 is, or the collection of these 5, is where this I, the self, must be found if it exists in the way that it appears. So when we go back to that quotation from the Heart Sutra, from the teaching of the Buddha that I referred to at the beginning, form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. This then is, here we're hearing the word form. So form refers to the physical body. So amongst the 5 aggregates, one searches first in form, physical body. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In other words, an independent I, a self-existent I, is not found in the body. it cannot be found in the body or within our physical form, because our form is empty. And emptiness is form shows that our very nature of our body, of our form, is that it is empty. And emptiness, the empty nature of the form, is nothing separate or apart from the form. And that goes on in the sutra. Emptiness is not other than the form. Form is also not other than the emptiness. So in this way, one comes to, when one searches for the independent, self-existent I within the form, within the body, one comes to recognize cannot be found. That's what cannot.
Didi kandaji drovers la pena ngansugi rada pena kyanzongala ya da Geshe Tsultrim slagorada. Geshe Tsultrim se taksa rodi, Geshe Tsultrim se pa ming taksa rodi, ani kyanzu migla yan thong dewi gi pigita zu sugbo dele teni ra lu dele teni ta ming tagwara ta lu dele teni tagwara modo lu ti pa shawayna ni lu de pa shawayna di shulaya Geshe Tsultrim se ji nye yo marwas ra ta lu dele teni tagwansa ani dele pa ming taksam thoni Geshe Tsultrim chogi yor modo tel lu dele matembi lu dele loxchi Geshe Tsultrim shi yo mares ona lu taran Geshe Tsultrim res te mares ta du sam tawndi ti imbayna kan la taksagi ani lu ti ona round tubareves lawndi lu ti round tuba mares tanda suk tongba wase lu ti round tubi tongbares ona lu yobati kaldeni shabarsna tongba round tubi tongba inza ten jomba inza round tubi tongba di ani round tongba res lawndi shen la ten jomba inza ani lu di shatu yore seg o dindigi ro ani lu gita nelule chebi lojindo as di sherab de nanshingi lu la tagbi ani ngai nilu sambi ani sherab ji yungores ta dirida sherab nyimbugi ani sonya gi zodi dinji sherab de songores ta di sherab nyimbu imba di chogdu giwa imba karesana pigi chagdang monsum yons zoban ya ge junging ani nganzi mariwa di bedi pa ani choje den dewi ani di chagon chonja di chagonza 콜에 셰르비니 모슬라고레스
I take myself as an example. My name is Geshe Tsultrim. When you see me, you say, there is Geshe Tsultrim. The process that's going on within each person who does this is independence on seeing my form, my body, with their own mind, knowing that my body is suitable to be labeled Geshe Tsultrim. Then their mind labels Geshe Tsultrim onto this body. So therefore, Geshe Tsultrim only exists independence on labeling by mind. That's the only way one can say there is a great Geshe Tsultrim. Independence on labeling by mind and labeling onto something suitable, this particular body. There is no Geshe Tsultrim other than what is labeled by mind. There is no self-existent Geshe Tsultrim. There is no self-existent body. Or instead of saying self-existent, one can say no independent. There is no independent Geshe Tsultrim or independent body. Because, as we saw in that quotation, the body, the form, is empty. Empty of being independent, of being self-existent. But it doesn't mean that Geshe Tsultrim or Geshe Tsultrim's body is non-existent. What it means is it does not exist in the way that it appears to our mind, which is as self-existent or independent. It does not exist in that way at all. which is the way that we innately believe it does. But the way it can be said to exist is merely or only labeled by mind. That's the only way we can say there's Geshe Tsultrim or Geshe Tsultrim's body, by labeling Geshe Tsultrim onto that particular body. And the consciousness that understands this process, both in particular that first aspect, that the way Geshe Tsultrim, the way that I appear to my mind, or the I or the self appears to the mind as being independent or self-existent, when sought, it cannot be found. When sought within the body is recognized to be empty of a self-existence, Geshe Tsultrim. Therefore, that consciousness realizes that the body does not exist by way of its own nature. Geshe Tsultrim cannot be found in that body. A self-existent Geshe Tsultrim cannot be found in that body. And thereby, the body is found to be empty of being self-existent. Geshe Tsultrim is found to be empty of being self-existent. This consciousness is a consciousness that realizes emptiness. Or it can be expressed as a consciousness that realizes reality, because it realizes how the body or Geshe Tsultrim exists in reality. And this consciousness is in accordance with reality, not contrary to reality. So it is a wisdom. Whereas what we heard before, the consciousness that grasps at the self-grasping, is an ignorance, because it grasps at the self in a way it does not exist. So therefore, this wisdom that realizes emptiness is in accordance with reality. And when it arises, it completely eliminates the ignorance of self-grasping, because these two are contradictory. Where there is one, there cannot be the other. So when we develop the wisdom, realizing reality, the ignorance that misapprehends, misconceives reality is eliminated. So this then is the meaning of the Heart Sutra, the meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. This is the meaning of emptiness. That's all.
The detail some tango was the dirita Sanji Tadrup Yanamena directions, John the Tadrup Yanamena directions, and Tinza Pena ni sugla mazo, sug de la Pumbo de la Dingao Nyang Maras, ni Sorwa, ni Sem, and ni Chita, and Chuk Handachonaya, dingi chokore, dingi and Nagasajiri, Namagasajiri, dingi Lombard Mado, and Delia, and Sus Ropilia, Dingari Sesagi, Zuzu Sachi, Savanita, Yomaras, the Yomaras. The Inaya, Nanzin Digi, Big Mebajilaya, Zuzu Sachi Pigilia, Zin Devanza, non to Tinisho was a race. The D Tolaya, Samotan, Tini. Ani di wangi ranjinzin set ranjinzin ki lotigi musu chagdan tengu yonza ranjinzin di ani ta ko lo ani truwajik lo shinju lojila teni chong yobati the gacha gyata mayinza ranjinzin di ani nongchu girimba de meba sokoyachi chagores the dig and never saw di zu la ya karsona shenjinzin se labiores shenjinzin sound gores imbayna ya and tartu but kares labana ninji said rendos ro sanji chunan sebi zewa ninji said rendos ta zewa ninji di kanraji gores lamdi ni nganzu dungar mendeng inchiki socha jilaya dungar jungu yobana di dungada tan chimaru nyambi samlo ki choya webadi kunguyo nisudan tumbaji rendos
Dining goma songondo din ninchi kola ding goma song.
dungar gnarvi ta simjinji yora dungar gnarvi simjindi susu gasa ima inkeja maris ko dungar gnarvi yobansa dungar mundoyadi mundebadi rangda pasho bani wadi chigba chigyan rewas Tinza dungar kinarvi simjendi dungar kinarvi yoba gyunzan chene ko dungar dedatan chimaru nyambi logic yetu bayna 동하르 나고요 봐 균생 코랑을 때니 코랑 송진 코티 동하드잖아 찌마로 냠비기 로직이 투바나 디 셴진제레스 셴진제레스 다디 로 디로디 가주스기 아니 기투바 디 저기 아니 랑 피기 찍고 대완되어 줘라다 랑진징 로델이야 누구요레스 로
What I'm discussing and presenting here is the very heart of Buddhism, the particular view of Buddhism, which is on emptiness and dependence arising. And the skilled meditator will apply it to each and every object, everything that one thinks of. So I mentioned the 5 aggregates. So one's body does not exist in the way that it appears. One's various consciousnesses, such as feeling and discernment, they too are dependent arisings, require labeling by mind. They do not exist by way of their own nature. One's country, one's individual possessions, everything exists, does not exist independently or by way of its own nature, but is empty of existing in this way. And the skilled meditator will, in each and every instance, look and see and recognize emptiness, strengthening their understanding of emptiness. And then, as mentioned immediately before, in the segments immediately before, through cultivating this wisdom, realizing emptiness, we progressively weaken our ignorance of self-grasping. And you remember earlier I mentioned there's one root cause to our suffering, the ignorance of self-grasping, but it can also be expressed as there's a self-cherishing mind. So these two really are quite entwined. So now we've spoken about developing the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is the direct antidote to the ignorance of self-grasping and eradicates that. But here, one should also, in dependence on this understanding of reality, also strive to eradicate the self-cherishing mind. So the ignorance of self-grasping is a mind that believes the self to exist in a way that it does not. The self-cherishing mind holds oneself as dear. In particular, holds oneself first and foremost as most precious. Here, conjoining our now understanding of reality with our investigation into whether this self-cherishing mind or holding oneself as dear, as first and foremost, is a correct way to think or not, we'll come to recognize that it too is mistaken and it too needs to be eliminated. So in the same way that the ignorance of self-grasping needed to be eradicated through a completely opposite mind, a wisdom as opposed to an ignorance, realizing emptiness, so too must the self-cherishing mind, or it's also called the grasping at oneself as dear, needs to be eradicated through cultivating a completely opposite or contrary mind, which is the other cherishing mind, or holding others as dear. This comes about in dependence on both, so to develop the attitude where you hold others as dear, comes about in dependence on cultivating both compassion and wisdom realizing emptiness. These two aid each other and help to establish an attitude where we value equally each and every being, see their welfare, their best interest as first and foremost. So to do so, we have come to understand our own position very clearly already, that we suffer and we want to be freed of suffering. And we suffer because of our afflictions, and our afflictions have as their very root cause the ignorance of self-grasping. And that this self-grasping is an ignorance because it's not in accordance with reality. And we know this to be true, not now just through theory, but because we have a wisdom realizing emptiness. So we've come to realize it, recognize it for ourselves. So powered by this wisdom that understands reality, we understand why others suffer, because this is why I suffer, and they too suffer because of their ignorance of self-grasping. And here a deep wish arises within us. May all beings be freed from this ignorance of self-grasping. In the same way that I'm striving to free myself from this ignorance of self-grasping, and thereby gain freedom from suffering by cultivating wisdom, may all beings do the same. And here, one then adds to this, because this is now talking wisdom and we're starting to bring in compassion. We now come to recognize that I really am only one person. And I'm actually now doing quite well because I have an understanding of reality. I can deal quite well with my suffering. But others are lost without this wisdom. Others are lost in pain. And others are innumerable in number. I really am only one. And I am only one, and I am now a little okay. Others are lost. They do not have this wisdom. And others are innumerable in number. So of course, I need to help them. They are precious. They are lost in pain, and there are so many. I have to help them to train them to gain the same wisdom realizing reality as I have. And thereby, I need them to gain freedom in this way through guiding them. Here we are developing the other cherishing mind, or the mind that holds others as dear. And this is the mind that's contrary to the mind that holds ourselves as dear, grasps at ourselves as dear. And this is how, through developing this contrary mind, the other cherishing mind, we destroy our own self-grasping mind. That's okay.
There is that Ganzu Namgi Ganzu Julia, the Ninji Sagi, Lochi, Yong Goros, in Ganzu Ninji, the Ninji Chori was said, Kansan Susu Gasa Jilia, Dungar Chomaina, that did Dunga the ten Chimaron Yambi Lochi. Mana Susu Dunga the ten Chimaron Yambi Lochi Mato, Susu Chi Magasada, and Chik Susu Lay Ching Java message in Baina, and some look Kayam Yavachi, Yungoras. The ninji di chogri was at Chagwasares. The ninji mama di pig dungar kinarvi and is socha kandaji when I dungar kinarvi about Junzel Chene, dunga the Tanachimaru, Yambi Logi to Baina. Ra dungar kinarvi about Junzel Chene, did dunga the Tanachimaru, Yambi Logi to Baina. That di any socha kandajalaya. Tebainaya, and it chikwaki to Gores, Lodi, Kazana, Dungar Mundeva, Randa Chikpa Chikjainza, and it Susu Dungar Mundeva Nanshi, Dungar Chona Mundeva Nanshi, Dunga Mayorachina Sambi, Lodi of Nanshi, and it Socha Kandajiman, Chikpa Chikjainza, that Dungar the Mundeva Imbata, Dunga the Solo Chonaya, and it Dugumeba, the Tamjela Mugua Jimba, but did you send the Chinita, Dungar Narviova. Dungar Narviavan Tondi, the Gunsen the Chene, Socha Tedadi, Dunga the Tana Chimano, Yambi Logi to Vina, that did the one Ninji Chimbo said, Reshas. Ro, that D Yovina, Ranchinzin, Sosu Chikpo Pigi, and the Chinzin Che de Maimba, any Kazota, Lord Gachimbuch, Ro, Tamchelia, Chikpa Tatuyagi, Lodi, Seven Ninjiton. Chidan Chanju Sem Sunguardania, so to Sadin Injilashas, Injitreshas, Ra, Digo Dasra.
All of us, we have imprints of compassion, and this we know, compassion does arise within us. But the compassion that we have is quite far from the compassion that is referred to in Buddhism, the compassion that we strive to develop. We can develop it. It's not beyond any of us because we have the imprints. Compassion does arise. But there are a couple of faults with the compassion that we have that we need to eradicate to give rise to the compassion that is meant in Buddhism. Firstly, our compassion is partial. It is biased. It's compassion, and we can see this when we're honest with ourselves. The compassion that arises towards those that we deeply care for, such as our loved ones, our family, our friends, or on a communal level, that community that we consider ourselves a part of. When a particular event befalls them and they suffer, compassion arises and it's strong and powerful. But if that same event, perhaps an illness, befalls someone else, and let's say it's someone we dislike, maybe no compassion will arise. Maybe we'll even be glad because we really despise this person. Or if that same condition is met, perhaps it's the same illness, by someone we have no connection with, we don't know at all, we just hear about it. Some feeling arises, but it's vastly different from the compassion that arises for someone that we deeply care for. So this mind of partiality needs to be eradicated. This bias we need to eradicate, where we feel close to some and distance towards others, and even indifference to the vast majority of suffering beings. This needs to be eradicated before compassion can actually arise. And the second fault with the compassion that we have, that we need to overcome to give rise to genuine compassion, as it's understood by Buddhism, is the compassion we strive to develop is the one that is focused on the actual causes of all forms of suffering, which is in relation to beings being deluded by their own ignorance. So that is what compassion is directed towards, not the ripening results of, say illness, but to the root cause of all suffering, the ignorance of self-grasping. So to be able to actually realize compassion, we're having the understanding of reality, cultivating a wisdom, understanding emptiness, helps immeasurably, because we have come to recognize clearly why we suffer, and that we don't have to suffer in this way. We can gain freedom from suffering by developing wisdom, and we have some experience of this. So therefore, we know with certainty. It's not a mere intellectual knowledge that we have faith and therefore we know that freedom is possible. We know because we feel the progress within us. We feel how we don't suffer in the way that we used to. So therefore, wisdom helps us greatly. Also, how it helps us is even prior to giving rise to wisdom, we have come to understand with vivid clarity the process of our suffering. It's throughout the rise of our afflictions, any of them that we suffer, and these come from ignorance. So we understand now, even before we've realized emptiness, that we suffer in this way, and also even before we get to this point, we have an understanding that each and every being is no different from me on a fundamental level. We all want to be freed of suffering and abide in happiness, and we all suffer for the same reasons. So this understanding is essential to overcome this closeness to some and distance from others, because we divide the world between those that we value and those that we sort of value and those that we dismiss. But when we think deeply, you'll realize there is, at a fundamental level, there is no difference between us. At a superficial level, many differences. But at a fundamental difference, there is no difference. We all yearn for happiness. And we all have the equal right to that happiness. And we all have ability to achieve that happiness, the capacity rather. We all have the capacity to achieve that. So in this way, we start to weaken this bias towards others by understanding at a fundamental level we are all the same. Also, through understanding the process by which we suffer, the process of the afflictions, we realize that we are all the same. And then by having a realization of emptiness, we know with certainty that freedom is possible for us and therefore for others too. And then when we understand that how others are suffering, when that suffering in a sense is needless because freedom is possible, deep compassion arises. Sorry. And compassion, when it arises, it compels one to help others, to guide them where they're open and receptive, to guide them skillfully to come to the same understandings that you have come to and are leading to your own freedom. So this then is how compassion and wisdom come together. That's what
어디다 데디 지단 가서다 남스탄기 위치 디나니 태버 침비 위치 증인진 바이나 딘디기 셰럽다 인지 상로님보디 다 가드이나 님마다바 상당 거야지 차샤스라 다 님마다바 상당 대바이나 아니 딘디기 셰럽다 세원인지님보디 소수 샘단 제용야지 그러 딘디글로 디소스 샘나라 가드 레바이나야 샘바디 기부친 차고레스 코 베는 출레야디 아니 슈 최종 돈이 아니 기부대 슈 최종 용거로 와서라 베나 아니 샤당 아게 차도라서 가즈글로디 가드 소수 샘을 레바이나 아니 마기바지마도 디 기부직자원이 용거요 말레스 딘자 아니 기부 공인진 바나 아니 로트소 상당 거지 학동도 기부디 셈바 기부 공인진 바나 아니 셔럽다 인지기 돌아야 상당 거야지 배 기침 못 차고 그래서
As I mentioned right at the beginning, the Buddha gave a vast number of teachings, and these can be divided in differing ways. One of the divisions is into those of the Mahayana. So the Mahayana, or the great vehicle teachings, within these is a great emphasis on the cultivation of compassion and wisdom. And therefore, those who aspire to these, cultivate these teachings within themselves, the teachings of the Mahayana within themselves, make an effort to meditate on compassion every day. And if they've had sufficient training, on emptiness too. And the goal is, with meditation, is that you take the knowledge that you've gained, the books you read, the teachings you receive, and you think about the topic in a similar way to as I've presented today, using many reasons, thinking about compassion, for example, cultivating compassion so it arises within you. And you do so repeatedly over a sustained period every day, and then during your day recalling what you meditated on. And in this way, you become ever more habituated to compassion. And then this habituation to compassion serves for your compassion you're cultivating in meditation to become indivisible with your daily mind. So in other words, it starts to arise and abide throughout the day, not just when in meditation, when you through relying on reasons, you generate it, but throughout the day. And as minds such as compassion, or also wisdom, as they arise within oneself, these are deeply virtuous minds. Then afflictions such as jealousy, pride, attachment, anger, and so forth, they struggle to arise. Or if they do, it will be only on occasion, and they won't be very strong. They won't dominate anymore. So you as a practitioner, as the meditator, your mind really is at peace. The afflictions will still stir, but they do not dominate, they do not overwhelm, and they are often largely absent. And this comes about through going through a process of hearing teachings and reflecting, meditating on them repeatedly over a sustained period, combining wisdom and compassion. This really is important. Doing so skillfully leads to so much happiness and benefit for others. That's what can.
셔럽당 인지기 삼바디 당간절에 공예진 디차고라서 디 좀된 디가 다가랑 송고라서 다 아니 간줄이야 안지 간주길이야 저인지 첨보당 아니 지 닐룩 동반인 도비 아니 셔럽기야 체도 아니 좀된 디 투규기 저인지 첨보디 배 살아야 샤대바 두지 텐도 살아 샤대바들이야 파워진리스 시그도스 된당 엄마 데렌도다 아니 저 좀된 디 투규기 닐룩 동반인 도비 셔럽디 아니 두지 텐도 살아야 샤대바들이야 지준 잠비양스 들다 인자 내 디기 지준 잠비양 그 생각 결진으로 엄마 알아봐서 나디 세티 존나 디고나 강로마 세죠 디 된투나 다 약슈레도스 다 딘디기 아니 디교비 카들이야 오늘 직 좀된 디기 투기로 예비 아니 동반인 또 셔럽 난시 니줄이야 기వ 쇼스 공론 딘디지 토니 아니 아라바자 가주 껴봐야 야자 야다 뭐 편도 연구였어레스 딘난시 좀 딘디 투줄이야 지선자 탐질이야 지바 시투에 저원 인지 침보 난시 니줄이야 기వ 쇼스 물람견 아니 제네식 생가 오만의 빼명세 가주 사토와나 다디 추 약슈드 딘사레스 로 산지기 추 약슈디 라나메바디 디레샤스
When the Buddha taught that how to cultivate wisdom and compassion, he taught it in a way as I presented. And in addition, he taught that to aid one's actual cultivation of wisdom and compassion, in your meditation, one should start out by generating the deep aspiration to generate compassion and wisdom, and then to make supplications to particular deities, the deities of Manjushri and Chenrezig. The way to understand these deities is that the deity of Manjushri is the embodiment of the mind of wisdom of all the Buddhas. So in other words, if the mind of wisdom of all the Buddhas were to take form, it would be as presented in the deity Manjushri. So one then, in one's heart, supplicates the wisdom of the Buddhas in the form of Manjushri, and supplicates, may I be successful in my training to cultivate the wisdom, realizing reality, so as to gain freedom from suffering, to be able to guide others to gain freedom too. One generates this deep yearning, and then with this in one's heart, one recites the mantra of Manjushri, the deity of wisdom, Oma Patanadi. And through reciting this mantra, whilst holding this deep, sincere aspiration, great benefit will come. Benefit in terms of aiding then one's analytical meditation that follows. Similarly, if one is going to be meditating on compassion, one calls to mind the deity of compassion, Chenrezig. And again, just like with Manjushri, Chenrezig, we should understand as the mind of compassion of all the Buddhas. If it were to take form, it would take form in the way as represented by Chenrezig. So one generates within oneself the deep determination, may I generate sincere compassion for all suffering beings. May I develop deep and abiding compassion, and thereby, under the influence of compassion, strive to benefit others, holding them all as dear. And thereby one makes a sincere supplication or request to Chenrezig for inspiration. Then one recites Chenrezig's mantra, or Mani Padme Hum. And again, the interdependence between the sincere wish to generate compassion and the recitation of Chenrezig's mantra. This brings about great benefit to one's then later meditation, trying to cultivate compassion. That's okay.
The Tsavigi Chomdin Dile Haji Sherogul Hach Yomares Imayana Chomdin Di Tugi Malong Tony Mizita and Sherab Jambianlia Shajavel Hadi could delay a mixig so Davanako Chomdin Di Tugi Malamji Tony and Chelab Mandavach Yungures the Chomdin Digi Tugi Sherab Di Ani Hala Shavatelaya Ani Shivi Hala Shajavata Trabug Hala Shajawa Ni Yungures
The Gumasong.
Chomdin Digi Tugi Sherab Di Ani Hala Shajawatela and La Shivajita Trabochi Shiva Sana Shiva.
She was in a Sem Shiva. Sem Shiva.
Shidig Laj. When the Jitun Jambian Tawadi Shidiris. Yidam Doji Jisha Tawadi Trabug. Ni Yungores. The Shivig Hadi and Anzuji and in Doi Pe and the Chun Yamslam becoming in the Shivig La and the Sherab La Dubia the Yungures. The Trabug La Yidam Doji Jisha Tawabi. Ye. Ani Nanjo Yamslam Balaya. Ani Chik Tanji Kondushiagi. Ani 세와 닌지당 아니 동반인 도비 셰럽기 냠네 야부치 메나 아니 디기 타비 냠네라 제가 들어봐이나 갑가라 냥가 요사레스 샘 축드야기 아 베나 타사 딘딜 요레스로 아니 샘바 축제 베나 다지 닌첸딘디 땅온디 동반인 도비 냠넨다 아니 잔주그 샘을 소비 냠네 야부치 메니 아니 상가가 취 년신 로섬 취som 땅어들이 아니 뉴종에 딘용고여레스 년가 전부 차고레스 대난 신기로 나도 더발이야 아니 비 시름기 냠nen도디 야보면이 베나 예담도 진지시기 냠nen 제가 도와인 제바이나 가고가 년가 용고여레스 딘자 상가가 취도 상와레스 고야디 상와레스 고야 균전 조디 딘디 돈 용고여서레스
Point to emphasize firstly is that Chenrezig and Manjushri, these should be understood as the embodiment of all the Buddha's compassion. So in the case of Chenrezig, and in the case of Manjushri, the embodiment of all the Buddha's wisdom. One should not think that the wisdom of Buddha Shakyamuni is any different from that of Manjushri, or the compassion of Buddha Shakyamuni is any different from that of Chenrezig. That is an error. It's not a case of one being greater than the other, but rather, if all the Buddha's wisdom were to take form, it would be the embodiment would be that of Manjushri, likewise with compassion. So these two deities are peaceful deities. There are other deities which have a wrathful approach, so deities such as Yamantaka. Before one engages in practices such as Yamantaka or any of the others with wrathful deities, it's imperative that one has trained well in both wisdom and compassion. If one has not, then training may disturb one's mind, harm one's mind. So therefore, before one engages in particular the training in wrathful deities, one needs to have a very stable, established practice, not just a practice, but have gained a benefit from it. In other words, one's mind has transformed to a sufficient degree, particular to do with wisdom and compassion. And it's for this reason that Tantra is called secret. It's a secret mantra, secret Tantra. The reason it's called secret is not because it is necessarily secret, but one needs to first have established an initial basis in training in one's own mind, initial level of transformation of one's mind, before applying oneself to secret mantra or to the tantric teachings. Because it's possible without that basis, one can harm oneself. That's all.
셰럽 추럽도 남바지비 남주기 셰럽스토로 돈이 도비 셰럽다 간지 셰럽 님부 나와 손대야게 수동보 동반이 수수 동반이 수시 마인셋 티 단다 상로 다운디 동반이 셋 공교레스 간지 아니 티단 냠도 심제 탐지 랑단자와 대원되버다 동안 문제바 지규리인바 아니 동안 문제비 심제 간다지 뭐냐 코랑 대반나 신기 동아들나 타워 쇼 냠비기 로티 공바이나 didn't say what you curious. The Dikadina, Kaduina, Tikawan draw cow, then ya some chocolate, the gum chocolates, Legachisarina, the cow drona, the Odus in drawing, the Digores, the church in the young, the Digsaris.
Today, what you've heard is about the very heart of the Buddha's Mahayana teachings. This has the two components of the view of Buddhism, which is the view of dependence arising and emptiness. And we had it presented through this line from the Heart Sutra: form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, and form is not other than emptiness. So through reflecting well, one comes to recognize nothing, no phenomenon exists by way of its own nature or independently, but everything is dependent. And meditating on emptiness, conjoined or together with meditations on compassion, where we come to hold all beings as dear, through recognizing how at a fundamental level, there is no difference between us. And we cannot therefore justify putting my needs before those of others. But in fact, because I've been training well in the Buddha's teachings, my mind is in quite a good place. I need to reach out to those in pain. So in this way, through understanding that all beings at a fundamental level are the same in wanting happiness and freedom from suffering, we take on the responsibility for helping others ease their suffering. And the way to bring about compassion and wisdom within oneself is this process of hearing teachings and reflecting or meditating on the meaning. And meditation is done in the way that it's been presented here today, where you take information you've gathered and you think about it and you come to conclusions. You analyze, you investigate. And this is something one does in meditation, in formal meditation, but it's not something that one only does then. In that, in any activity where we have a little bit of mental space, we can turn our mind to what you were meditating on. So whilst you're going about your varying activities, not if you're needing to concentrate on a particular task, but if it's just you're not having to concentrate on something particular, you can turn your mind to what you meditated on and thereby regenerate what you meditated in that morning. This is the quick method to quickly generate qualities of mind such as compassion and wisdom. That's okay.
도전아, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Please.
Thank you.
Final Lamin dedication, page 14 in a small booklet. From my 2 types of merits vasa space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a grand length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded paths of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings. With the points of the path as I have discerned them, may I uphold the Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion, in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted boundless peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time. By even this graded path to enlightenment completed, due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all human and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. Thank you very much.